Hi everyone, this is Keith Stone with the Center for Hellenic Studies, here for another installment of the Kosmos SOciety online open house. Our guest today is Doug Frame. He earned his PhD from Harvard in classics in 1971, has been a classics teacher since then, and also an associate director of the center since then, and continues to do research. Doug, if I could begin the way that I've often been beginning and ask you to tell us how you got into classics. What drew you to it? Were you always, a classicist at heart?
No, I don't think I was always a classicist at heart, but started pretty early. I actually, had, I guess, 4 years of Latin by the time I got to college, and started Greek, and had intended to be an English major. Found that Homer really seduced me. That came, I think it was in the, I've forgotten whether it was the second year, I guess. Anyway, that's where it all started, and went to graduate school after that, and here I am now. So it's, it's unusual in this respect that, I had a solid background in the languages from a pretty early point. And so I was blessed in that way. I got that. And that's not always easy for people to do. Anyway, enough said. So I regard myself as fortunate.
Great. Great. Without any further ado then, feel free to launch into what you have prepared for today.
Okay. Why don't we start with the passage in Odyssey 13 that I suggested as reading, first 300 lines or so. This is the return of Odysseus to Ithaca. The Phaeacians bring him back, and he has a lot of treasure with him, which he stows in a cave, and this cave is sacred to nymphs. Before he does that, he has Athena's help doing that. He's confused as to his whereabouts. Athena comes also in disguise, and then they manage to introduce each other to themselves to each other, and Odysseus and Athena stow the treasure away. And this treasure consists of a lot of things that the Phaeacians have given him, but it includes especially tripods. And that's kind of in the title of my talk today, the tripods that come with him to Ithaca. So tripods are special. They are they feature prominently in the Homeric poems in a number of different ways. Kind of a prestige possession, one that gets traded around among aristocrats, let's say. And they have a use. They heat water for baths, for one thing. I don't know if you've seen pictures of tripods. I mean, it means something with 3 feet on it. These are very large objects made of bronze. I mean, to us, a tripod is something you put a camera on, but these are bronze objects, very expensive, usually with a cauldron attached to them. I'm not quite clear whether the cauldron has to be attached or is sometimes attached. In the case of Odysseus, what the Phaeacians give him includes tripods, tripodes, and cauldrons, lebetes, and they're mentioned separately. Well, other times a tripod is assumed to have a cauldron. So heating water for baths, wine can also be mixed in them. They're a prestige object, and at the funeral games for Patroclus, they are the most valuable prize in the biggest event. I would say this is the chariot race. The winner is going to get a very large tripod. It has enormous capacity, 22 measures, whatever a measure is, and a slave woman in addition. This is first prize. Second prize is a mare, a horse. So there's that use. Otherwise, in Greek society, there are dedications of tripods in Panhellenic centers. Olympia, for example, where victors presumably dedicated their prizes to the god afterwards. So you have, tripods at Olympia, also at Delphi. These are an important cultural item.
Doug, if I could
So,
interrupt, you said that
yeah,
they're very large. What's kind of scale? Are they as tall as a person? Are they
maybe,
monumental in space?
yeah,
Or?
they are. They are. I don't. This is a question that I can't really quite answer. I'm not really at home in material culture, so. What I'm telling you now is just the basics. I would say that they're not as tall as a person, but they could be. I mean, there's some enormous ones too that I'll get off my message here if I start talking about the little bits that I know.
They're culturally
But
very large, even if not.
they're large. They're big. It's a big basin, with a lot of water in it. Not quite a bathtub, but
Okay.
big. Okay, so tripods, and the Phaeacians make a special point at the beginning of this passage in Odyssey 13, King Alcinous does, of complimenting Odysseus. He's just finished this long tale, and Alcinous says, let's give him a gift of tripods and cauldrons, each one of us, and how many that amounts to. This is a point that I should just mention now, that how many tripods did Odysseus get? Well, it's not really specified in Odyssey 13. Earlier, when Odysseus gets a gift of clothing, this is robes and tunics and gold. This is after he has his display in the athletic games. It's 13 different kings, they're called. It's 12 kings, and then Alcinous is the 13th. Each give him one of these items. Now, if we assume the same number, and why not, in book 13, that would mean that there would be either 12 or more likely 13 tripods. Okay, now the number isn't really spelled out in Odyssey 13, although Odysseus does. He thinks he's been cheated, that remember, he doesn't know where he is when he wakes up on the shores of Ithaca. He thinks that the Phaeacians have cheated him. They've taken him somewhere else. So he quickly counts the tripods, and they're all there. But we don't know what the number is. So there's not a lot of emphasis on the number. Well, the number becomes rather important when we start, when I move to my second point here, which has to do with archaeology. This, I'm going to talk about an archaeological find on the island of Ithaca in a place called Polis Bay, which, this is Ithaca. This is Odysseus's supposed homeland, where in the middle of the 19th century, a large deposit of tripods was found. And it seems that there were either 12 or 13 tripods there. Now, these tripods were not deposited all at the same time. They were deposited over maybe a century and a half, the 9th into probably the first half of, or even to the end of the 8th century. But anyway, the number seems to be either 12 or 13. And I can't explain why there is that confusion. This is, again, is material culture, and it's a whole subject in itself. Anyway, the find is interesting. It's Ithaca, We have the Odyssey. These tripods must have something to do with Odysseus, but what? We really don't know. I mean, it's just a fact that these tripods are there, very prestigious objects, and in an unlikely place, a cave that was probably sacred to nymphs, just the way it is in the Odyssey. And there they are. So, well, there are various different ways you can think about this, but, and maybe I'll just list a few. I mean, you could think in antiquity that, well, this is, you know, the tripods belong to Odysseus himself, that, you know, and so what we've got in the Odyssey is a historical novel that actually happened. Well, this, of course, doesn't work because they weren't all deposited at the same time. They were deposited over 150 years. You could also argue or think that the Odyssey was a the Odyssey is an attempt to explain why the tripods are there. In other words, the Odyssey is an etiology. That is possible, but it leaves the question that why were the tripods deposited in the first place? What was the dedication about? Then you get to the idea that, well, is it possible that there was a hero cult to Odysseus and that these were dedications? This is pretty early for a hero cult. And so that remains a possibility. But maybe a better idea is one that Irad Malkin has proposed in his book, The Returns of Odysseus. And that is that these are, it's not a hero cult per se, but what he calls a heroic cult. And what he brings into consideration here is explorers at this early period, the 9th and 8th centuries, before the era of colonization. He calls it the era of proto-colonial exploration. These would be explorers from places like Euboea and Corinth who were discovering the West, and they would have gone past Ithaca. It turns out that Ithaca would be an important point for these explorers, and that they were aware.
Sorry, Doug, could I just interrupt you for a second? Could you fiddle with the connection on your headphones to the computer? There's a lot of static all of a sudden when you talk.
Is that any better?
Yeah, it's perfect. Back to normal. Thanks.
Okay. Oh, so well, sorry about that. Okay. Anyway, these the idea is that proto-colonial explorers imitated what Odysseus had done, and made dedications.
Is it better?
Yes, I think so.
Okay.
Made these dedications as sort of an imitation. So that there are lots of different ideas. But with this approach, or with any other, the story, now I'm going to switch my topic a little bit, but with this Malkin's approach or any other explanation, the story of Odysseus's homecoming, tripods and all, must go back to the 9th or 8th century BC. We just take Malkin's idea. There's an imitation going on. Well, that means that there is a tradition for the Odyssey at that point. Now, this is a real problem for me when it comes to the Phaeacians. And so I'm going to switch my topic a little bit now from tripods to Phaeacians, and see how I'm doing on time. I think I'm fine. I can spend a little time talking about my ideas about the Phaeacians. And my idea is, for one thing, anybody who discusses this problem of, why are the tripods there in the 9th, the 8th century, somehow or other imagines that the story behind the Odyssey involves the Phaeacians. It's always the Phaeacians who are imagined as bringing, and why not? This is the way that the Odyssey presents it. But for me, this is a problem. For me, the Phaeacians really belong to a late period in the development of the Odyssey. They belong to the period of the monumental expansion of the Iliad and the Odyssey. And I think that that took place, under circumstances which the Phaeacians actually helped to reveal. The Phaeacian royal family, in particular, I think shows that has a connection with the Ionians, and the Ionians as they celebrated the festival of the Panionia. And this is where I think the Iliad and the Odyssey were expanded to monumental proportions. Part of that expansion was the Phaeacians, bringing the Phaeacians in to represent this audience. This is going to be a little bit haphazard here, but try to follow me. One reason for thinking that the Phaeacians belong solely to the Odyssey, let's start with that point, is that the Phaeacians really bring only Odysseus home. They don't bring anybody else home. And they never did. I mean, there was nobody before Odysseus either. Why can you say that? It's because their function as homebringers, if I can use that term, is ended within the Odyssey. This is Poseidon turns their ship into a rock, and from now on, they will never bring anyone home again. So that being the case, the Phaeacians are really tied to the Odyssey. Well, you could say, okay, but they're tied to the Odyssey, but were they tied to the Odyssey for a long time, as early as the 9th or the 8th century? And again, I say no, and the reason is that the Phaeacian royal family really represents the Ionians of the late 8th and early 7th century BC. This is the king, the queen, and the royal prince. Those three in particular represent different stages. This is something I've talked about a good deal and written about. Three different stages in the history of the Ionians as they themselves imagined it. The earliest stage being Pylos, the middle stage being Athens, and the final stage being Miletus. And then from Miletus spread out to the rest of Ionia. The king, Pylos, is in effect a second Nestor. The queen, Arete, has all to do with Athens, and Athena is the city goddess of Athens. And the prince, whose name is Laodamas, has to do with the last king of Miletus, who was an important figure who took part in the Levantine War, so called at that time. He was the last king of Miletus. I think that the way I argue this, the way I see it, is that Laodamas is the figure more responsible than any other, both for the occasion of the Panionia, the League of 12 Cities, and for the expansion of the Homeric poems in that context. There, I've said a lot in just a few minutes there, but this is my view of the Phaeacians. So it's a problem to me that now the Phaeacians, what have you got left of the Phaeacians? If you take away the king, the queen, the royal prince, you don't have very much left. You have Nausicaa, and wonderful as she is, I don't think she's enough to do the job of getting Odysseus back to Ithaca with tripods. So the Phaeacians, to me, just don't work. So it's a dilemma for me. And if I can just stop for a second and say why, I'm pursuing this topic now anyway. The Phaeacians, to me, just don't work. I'm sorry? So I'm getting feedback now. I think I'm hearing myself. Are you hearing me?
No.
You're not hearing me?
No.
I'm hearing you okay.
We can hear you, yes. I think there was just some sound from someone else.
Just a moment of, yeah.
Okay, are we okay?
I think so. Yeah, continue. We'll see how it goes.
Oh, okay. There's a conference that's going to take place in Ithaca later this summer of the Center for Odyssey and Studies, which is, I think it's just great that there is such a center, that it goes back decades. I'm just having a problem. Yeah.
Can they hear you now, Doug? Maybe
I think so. I think
I
everything's
see
okay.
you are presenting
Yeah, that's great.
to everyone. Okay. So let's just try this.
Yeah.
Take this off for a moment. Let's give that a shot, okay?
Oh no, sorry, I think we had it fixed.
You had it fixed? Okay. So I'm going to plug it back in, Doug,
Okay.
and see how it feels.
Yep. Is that,
Great.
are we still okay?
Yep.
Okay.
Great, thanks.
On? Okay.
Anyway, this conference will be in August, and it's on I think the title of it has to do with the upper and the underworlds in Homeric epics, something like that. And I thought this would be a good chance for me to try to think about this problem, archaeological problem, and what better place to do it than in Ithaca. But I didn't know really where I'm going to come out with it. So I submitted my proposal really asking more of a question than providing an answer. I hope I've made you see what the question is for me. I realize that it's a more urgent thing to me because maybe it's not urgent at all to anybody else, but it is to me because of the work I've done with the Phaeacians as representing the Homeric audience. I think that's a significant thing. And I'm ready to go to the mat for that one, meaning that I've just done too much thinking about the Phaeacians to let go of that idea, the connection with the Homeric audience. I think it really works. So I hope you understand the question for me. Phaeacians are late, tripods are early, tripods must have something to do with Odysseus. Who was it that brought Odysseus home if it wasn't the Phaeacians? Well, I have a suggestion, and I think I will just, I'll back up a little bit. I'll go back to Odyssey 13, the passage that I asked you to read. The one thing I haven't talked about so far is the encounter between Odysseus and Athena and the lying tale that Odysseus tells Athena. Odysseus has a lot of lying tales in the second half of the Odyssey. And he tells one to Eumaeus in book 14. He tells one to Penelope in book 19. He has another one for his father in book 24. There are a lot of lying tales. What's interesting about these lying tales is that they're all realistic, totally realistic. Maybe the last one to his father has got some funny geography in it that we don't quite understand. But the others have to do with Crete, with Egypt, with events that they're like novels in a way, things that could have happened to an adventurer, to a warrior. They're very realistic. And in this respect, they're completely different from what Odysseus, when he's claiming to be telling the truth, tells his audience in Phaeacia. Oh, there, it's all imaginary. I mean, you've got, one-eyed monsters and men turned into pigs and all sorts of things that never happen. So when he's telling the truth, it's all imaginary. When he's lying, it's all perfectly plausible. It's all straightforward. Well, the first story, the one that he tells to Athena in disguise, he doesn't know it's Athena. It is, I think, has one really significant element in it. What he says is that not Phaeacians, but Phoenicians brought him to Ithaca, that he's from Crete, that he left Crete, and he makes up a story about that he fought in the Trojan War. He fought along with the main Cretan leader, Idomeneus, and that he had a falling out with the son of Idomeneus when he came back because he was sort of an independent sort, and the son of Idomeneus was trying to take his property. And it was Phoenicians who came and took him and all his property, which is there on the shore, he points to it with Athena, who brought him there. So my idea is that in earlier tradition, before it's Phaeacians, it's Phoenicians, and that the Odyssey of Odysseus, the homecoming of Odysseus, in earlier tradition, had certain basic features which lasted, namely all the treasure that comes back with him and gets hidden in a cave, and probably the problem of the suitors and his wife and all of that. But it was more realistic. If you look at other homecomings, nostoi, as represented in the Odyssey, well, in particular, the nostos of Menelaus, that's quite realistic in many respects, not in all respects, but he's in Egypt. He's not in this Never Never land of Odysseus' adventures, which can't be located anywhere. He's in Egypt, and what's he doing? He's gathering treasure. He also gets to Phoenicia itself. It isn't Phoenicians who bring him back, but he gets back with his own ships. But my point is that it's all very realistic. So I just wonder if this wasn't the character of the Odyssey earlier as well, the story of Odysseus, that is, if that also wasn't a more typical homecoming when compared with, let's say, that of Menelaus. Now, the homecoming of Menelaus has its marvelous aspects. The old man of the sea and all of that, the prophecy, and the old man of the sea who can turn himself into whatever, and Menelaus has to wrestle with him. And so there are probably always marvelous aspects, but I just wonder if it wasn't quite late that, namely the period of the monumental composition of the Iliad and the Odyssey, that you get these adventures that are totally in an imaginary world for Odysseus. So anyway, this is my idea. I'm just coming on this idea. As I say, I kind of signed myself up for the conference, and then knowing that I was going to do the presentation today, I started actually doing some work. I read Malkin's book cover to cover, which I had not done before. I'd read parts, and but I've had this thought about the Phaeacians and the Phoenicians before. I'd never really quite put it together. What made me put it together was seeing the lie that Odysseus tells Athena. That, put it this way, that the lie that Odysseus tells Athena, I think, is the earlier tradition about his homecoming, that there's an element of truth to it, put it that way. That thought had never really occurred to me before. So it's something that it's new to me, and I need to work it out. I'm still, at the beginning of that. One reason that I did think that there was a connection between the Phoenicians and the Phaeacians has to do with formulaic language. That the name Phaeacians in Greek is Phaeakes, and Phoenicians is Phoenikes. They're the same in terms of metrics. And the epithets that go with both of them, the Phaeacians are called famous for ships, Nausiklutoi. Well, so are the Phoenicians. They are Phoenikes, Nausiklutoi. Just once in the case of the Phoenicians, it happens to be in Eumaeus' story in Odyssey 15. He has a whole story involving Phoenicians. The Phoenicians are just the seafarers in these lying tales. There are others, but the Phoenicians in particular bring people here and there. And in the case of Eumaeus' story, the Phoenicians, his story is that he was the son of a prince in a place called Syriae, an island, and that there was a Phoenician woman living in the house. Phoenician traders came and took her. She had been, well, it's a long involved story. Anyway, the Phoenicians are there, and that's where they're called Phaeakes, Phoenikes, Nausiklutoi. And another epithet, a more general one, is just a gaoi, used of both the Phoenicians and the Phaeacians. It just means something like proud, so that doesn't tell too much. Maybe just talk a little bit more about who the Phoenicians were. My point here is that they're part of the realistic world, with Egypt and Crete and all the rest of it. In the 9th and 8th centuries, the Phoenicians were everywhere. They were the seafarers. I mean, from one end of the Mediterranean to the other. They founded the city of Carthage, right, in North Africa, what's now Tunisia. This was their colony. And in the Iliad and the Odyssey, they also are credited with carrying things I'm thinking now again of the possibility that Odysseus, when he arrives on the shores of Ithaca in the earlier tradition, had the Phoenicians to thank for that. Well, here's an interesting thing that I just noticed, that when Odysseus, this is in the Iliad, and the funeral games for Patroclus, Odysseus wins the foot race. And the first prize in the foot race is a mixing bowl which had been made in Sidon. Now, Sidon is a Phoenician city, and the Sidonian men. This is another way of saying Phoenicians. Anyway, the Sidonian men had made this mixing bowl, and the Phoenicians had brought it as seafarers, had brought it to the king of Lemnos. It's, again, an involved story. This gets to Achilles because a son of Priam that he had sold, that Achilles had sold to the king of Lemnos, brought this bowl to Achilles. So we get this whole little story. Sorry, I'm being a bit long-winded about this, but there's just lots about the Phoenicians, and they're bringing treasure. What else can I think of at this point along these lines? I think maybe it's time for me to, I think I've perhaps said more, either enough or too much, but
definitely enough. I mean, it's been really interesting, but yeah, we're getting on in the hour. Maybe there are some questions from those assembled here.
Right. Give me just a second to see if there wasn't one or two final things to think about. I think I've managed to, in one form or another, to throw out at least the thoughts that are going around my head at the moment. And so I would be interested in, what anybody else has to say at this point, or to ask.
I have some questions, but I'll definitely yield to the others here. So just raise your hand or speak up. Go ahead, Maria. Don't forget to unmute yourself.
Yes. Well, thank you very much, Doug, for your thought-provoking presentation. It was really wonderful. This is just in addition to what you said, and probably a personal observation. I recently read one chapter of Irad Malkin's book, Small Greek World, where he dedicates one specific chapter about Heracles and the Phoenician god Melkart, and how, in a way, their identity intertwined, and they represented also a way of appropriation, in terms of heritage, of common heritage, because both Greeks and the Phoenicians built networks across the Mediterranean when they colonized the Mediterranean. So in a way, I think the insight that you offered us, that probably the Phaeacians correspond to Phoenicians, I think it makes sense with what Irad Malkin presented in his book about the Greek and the Phoenician colonization of the Mediterranean, and how, in a way, some of the traditions that they brought, their traditions were brought together. Well, I'm not an expert, you're the expert. I'm just, as I told you, this is a personal observation.
Thank you, Maria. No, I appreciate that. Oh, I'm getting feedback now.
Oh, I think it'll end now that Maria has muted her microphone again.
No, that is very nice, and I must read that. I have more Malcolm than I need to read at this point. If you just take Homer, though, that's an excellent point, and the historical background is something that just fascinates me at this point too. I mean, everything that the Phoenicians did, including the foundation of Carthage, just as context. But the Iliad and the Odyssey themselves just have the Phoenicians often enough to know that they were an important factor. Going back to the 9th and the 8th century, that's I guess it's the 8th century is the foundation of Carthage. But anyway, the 9th and the 8th century is when the Phoenicians are important, a huge factor. That it was from the Phoenicians that the Greeks got the alphabet. They were the intermediaries, and then the Greeks developed it. But you know, the contacts with the Phoenicians are, you know, very significant for that reason alone. Here's another point. I'm thinking of things that you know, if I'd kind of worked this all out a bit more logically, I would have said. But going back to the names, the Phoenician name, Phoenikes, it turns out that's the Greek name for Phoenicians. And it's the one that's used. We all use it. And it maybe it came from an external source, but it's really only attested in Greek. These people from Sidon and Tyre, you know, these are it's modern Lebanon or what was Syria. Sorry, I lost my train of thought there. Well, anyway, here's the point I want to make about the names. That the name Phaeacians, Phaeakes, is related to, it comes from an adjective meaning gray. The adjective is phaios, and it means gray. There are actually a couple of passages of Plato where he says, phaios is between, black and white. So it's gray. So these are the gray people. It's a color. Well, Phoenikes, the name, comes from phoinos, which means blood red or just red. Now the question is, why were the Greeks calling the Phoenicians the red people? Was it because they were sunburned? Was it because they had red dye, which they did? This is, you know, Tyrian purple. You know, there are different ideas about that. So that part fits as well. That you know, to invent. I hate to use that word. We don't like that word when we talk about traditional poetry. But when a new name for a fabulous people is based on an already existing name, I think that you know, kind of corroborates, or it's another piece in the puzzle, that it's a color. These are the gray people. Well, why are they gray? I don't know. They're liminal people. They're neither bright nor dark. They're neither, well, they are imaginary, I would claim, but they are able, by means of their magic ships, to connect with the real world. That's how they can cross over the boundary from the imaginary to the real. It's their magic ships. And that's how they bring Odysseus home. He's, of course, asleep at the time. Was he just dreaming? No, that's not the suggestion. But anyway, yeah. Okay.
Any other questions?
Element.
Go ahead, Jack.
Oh yeah, well, hi Doug. Thanks for this very stimulating conversation. You know, has anyone done an analysis of the Phoenicians and the Phaeacians as doppelganger? You know, like the bad Phoenicians and the good Phoenicians, or you know, Virgil has the Carthaginians being the audience for Aeneas,
right.
And you know, it's the same scene. You know, come to coere omnes.
Right.
You know, they all grew silent. You know, they were all good listeners.
Right. Oh, well, that's fascinating, Jack. That had not occurred to me. Yes, that instead of a Phaeacian audience, in a sense, you've got a Phoenician audience. There's a connection there. Homer, Phaeacians, Virgil, Phoenicians. And by the way, the word for Phoenicians in Latin is Poini.
Puni.
Yes, or Puni, right. Either Poe or Punic, right? The Punic Wars between. So that's very nice. Thank you for that. Yeah.
Georgia, I think. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah.
Thank you. Please allow me some remarks. Thank you very much. I find very fascinating, extremely fascinating, your connection to the Phaeacians and the royal family specifically in the Decapolis, in Ionia, and so forth. I want to go a bit back to Odysseus' middle name, almost middle name, Poikilometes, Polymetes, and so on. Same characterization for Athena, the daughter of Metis. Metis, in a way, like the one with the trickster, with the many tricks, the many, let's say, schemes, but actually, let's say the master of trick being the first Prometheus. What he did, actually, I think the initial understanding of Metis is something that actually conceals the truth, but it's in a way, the truth is hidden, but it's there. So I'm wondering whether in the lies, we call it lies, but it's not, it's just a multi-level presentation of something that has within it truth. So for this, we can perhaps make peace with the fact that there are real, things that we can take in, when Odysseus talks, not everything is to throw away as a lie, obviously. So I think I can come to terms with that. The second thing is why suddenly there's this imaginary world coming in. No, the imaginary world, no, the mortals within the imaginary world. I mean, the Phaeacians are the mortals that appear in the wanderings of Odysseus. So they're called Ahitoi. They are, of course, as you say, seafarers. Another one is the Pheleretmoi. So they're, in a way, their being in the imaginary world is perhaps the ticket for the royal family or the Ionian connection to step in the epic. It's like, the artistic device to have them step in. This will be, I find it very interesting that Alkino says to the rest, to the nobility, don't worry about the tripods, we will collect, the expense later, because individuals cannot sustain such an expense. It's such a realistic, down-to-earth, pragmatic, civic life element, which is, in a way, surprising for the circumstances of the narration. Connection, and perhaps I'm thinking too much, perhaps in a wide sense, in the wrong direction, but I see it as a kind of emancipation of the Ionian colonies. There is actually a passage in Herodotus about tripods. He finds, I think, the sanctuary of Apollo in Thebes, or Apollo something, I don't remember. There are tripods with Phoenician inscription, epigraph.
Yes.
So you mentioned yourself, there is this Phoenician link, the Phoenicians brought the alphabet, the Greeks got the alphabet, by creating the Phaeacians and connecting that to their own, let's say, royal family. In a way, they cut the umbilical cord and say, now we stand on our feet, enough, we just stand on ground, which is a different story.
Right.
So, I just, as I said, I take it to the very creative, original, we cut string.
Oh, these are all great points. I'm afraid you've frozen up on me now, but no, I can see Jack moving. It's
I think Georgia has just
Georgia that I've lost.
has frozen.
Real creative moment.
Oh, now she's
Sorry.
back.
Oh, is it good now? I think I find it still very intriguing. Thank you. I find it very intriguing to have a real creative moment within the oral tradition. There is something there for me to dig further. Yeah.
Yes. You and I have talked a bit about that already, and I think that this is the really creative moment. I've used the word expansion, that the Iliad and the Odyssey, to me, that they just go together, and I have reasons for saying that. in performance, that they were expanded together, that, well, this has to do with, the notion of 12. Let me come back to that. We're probably running out of time, but there are 12 cities in the Panhellenistic League. It's the Dodecapolis. There are 12 cities. And this is, I imagine that it's and I argue that it's the Panionia, the festival, common festival of these 12 cities, where the Homeric poems were created, essentially, out of a tradition, of course, but on that scale. And if you look at how they're structured, the Iliad and the Odyssey are based on 12. I mean, there are 24 books in each poem, but that's the basic point. But they go together in groups of 4, the books. If you look at the beginning of the Odyssey, the first 4 books they're called the Telemachia, the story of Telemachus. The next 4 books are Odysseus dealing with the Phaeacians, right? And the next 4 books, 9 through 12, are his story in front of the Phaeacian audience. So the whole notion of 12, well, for one thing, just make this point, the notion of 12 tripods has to do with that. I mean, it's nothing that goes back to the 9th or the 8th century. It's, in my opinion, it's got to do with that. So if there are 12 tripods in the cave, I think that was a later arrangement, from the 4th century, something like that. Anyway, so yeah, the number 12. So many things here, so many things. I just,
I was wondering, Doug, if following up on your idea of the Cretan tales being the earlier, more realistic form of the story, before the fantastic elements, would you say that audiences would have recognized Odysseus's lies as what they used to know as the actual Odyssey? Would they have had this sense of creativity and transformation, or would the poets perhaps have, the Homeric poets? Yeah.
Oh, I would really love if that were the case. I mean, because the best example of the Phoenicians, in this idea of mine, is the one that comes immediately. As soon as he's there, he tells this lie to Athena. And what better place if, if the way the Odyssey presents things is playing off against something else, to have them juxtaposed like that. So a good point. I really think so, or I would like to think so.
Yeah.
I'd like to air a thought that one of my less reverent compadres would I know have thought of by now is can we distinguish between real stories and cover stories? And the treasure there, is it really coming from Syria, or is it really the Trojan booty that he needed a cover story to bring home without bringing his companions home that he so dearly wanted to come? Did he make off with all the Trojan loot himself?
Right, and left the companions behind. That's an idea. I don't know. Well, let me think about. Well, I don't know. Well, I think we'll just have to think about that one. No, I've lost Jack again. I'm not hearing it.
Yeah. Well, the Umea story, I think, has a lot of structural stuff in it about the Phoenicians and their role in the early Mediterranean Bronze Age Mediterranean culture. They did some tricky things, as Herodotus suggests in book one of the histories.
Right, right.
It's enslaving, and were they the sea people that?
The end of the Bronze Age. Yeah.
Or were they the Philistines that the
Right.
Israelites had so much trouble with?
Right, right. Or another problem. Right.
Yeah, I mean, right there. And you know, they were so entrenched in Italy. You know, the Pergi tablets.
Right.
You know, that's basically a treaty between the Etruscans and the Phoenicians.
Right.
And of course, the Romans. You know, we look at it all from the Roman perspective. The Romans won. You know, they defeated the Phoenicians. They defeated the Etruscans, and they wrote the history books. So a lot of Phoenician and Etruscan and Hellenic history is covered over, but Sicily, I think, holds the key to a lot of the revisionism, because it was great, had great soil. It was much fought over. You know, there were those ancient peoples, the Sicani and the ones on either side of them, and then the Greeks and the Phoenicians moved in, Acragas and you know, those wars. And finally, the Romans came in as the, you know, as the winner take all after the Hellenes, and the Phoenicians beat themselves down.
Mm-hmm.
So to me, it just sort of seems like a natural setup for, you know, editing the Odyssey, you know, at the beginning of the 5th century, say, that the Phoenicians had to be kind of massaged, you know, somehow.
Mm.
So we could keep them in the last stories, the cover stories, the you know, the Eumaeus story where they're really the bad guys.
Mm. They're both good and bad guys. If you look at the different stories, that they're just out there doing. You know, it's a particular Phoenician. I think it's in Odysseus's own long involved story to Eumaeus in book 14. It's a Phoenician who tries to sell him into slavery. I mean, this is a story has many, many parts to it, but one part is that a Phoenician tries to sell him into slavery. And then the Thesprotians at the end of his story also try to sell him into slavery. So there's a lot of that going on. I know we're running out of time, and I just, you know, have these thoughts, you know, pre-Descalier that, you know, I should have said that. There is one thing that I know I didn't work in properly when I was talking about the Phaeacians as representing the Homeric audience itself. And just so I say it and realize and, you know, make the point, it has to do with the function of the Phaeacians. Within the Odyssey, they are Odysseus's audience. And so that it's for 4 books. It's one of these 4-book segments that they are his audience. So the Homeric audience is listening to Odysseus tell his tale, and the Phaeacians are listening to Odysseus tell his tale. They are one and the same. I mean, this is what happens by that poetic mechanism. There, I said it. And so if you start with that and then kind of bring the other points in, which I think I didn't do as coherently as I might have. But anyway.
Doug, it was brilliant. But let me throw one other thing in that I know from studying Etruria a little bit is, you know, like in the 9th century, it was a very dull sort of pottery that they had. But somewhere in the 8th or 9th century, they come in with this beautiful gold work, you know, like the Gutadoro, the little beaded fine stuff that you see in the Vatican. And, you know, I've read scholarly archaeological notes that say what essentially that their relationships with the Styrians is what brought the gold work into the Etruscan culture. You know, up there, Florence, Toscana, and so you know, you bring up so many interesting ideas here. You know, I think you're opening a window to a whole new way of looking at the at Homer and seeing the relevance of archaeology.
That would be my hope. I don't know. We'll see.
Well, thank you, Doug, and thanks everyone.
And thank you, everyone. Thank you for all the response. I really appreciate it.
And I can say that we'll have a discussion thread on the Kosmos Society page for this talk, or somewhere, which we can link to continue asking questions or discussing. And we may ask you to peek in on that, Doug, if you have time, but that's all for the future.
Very good.
So thanks again, everyone. Until next time.
Thank you.